Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to start off a new series where we're going to look at all the different army books which were available in Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition and review them. Go over each of the units, the special rules, how they worked. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time now, especially as I want to get back into battle reports soon, so I figured that now would be the best time to start this series. Now yes, as you can imagine, the Skaven will be first, as it was an army I played quite competitively all the way until the end of Warhammer Fantasy. So we're going to be looking at the Skaven book, we're going to go through everything. Now keep in mind that this is a 7th edition army book, as unfortunately the Skaven never had an 8th book, but it translated rather well and it was probably one of the best books available. And those of you watching who probably only know the Warhammer series through Total War, you might find some of these units extremely shocking, mainly because they act so differently in the Total War series. But with all that being said, let's just jump right in. We're not going to go and discuss the lore of stuff, mainly because, well, there's a lot of lore in these books. These serve as an introduction to your race, not only just your units. But what we're going to do is we're going to go all the way down to the special rules and work our way down through there. As you can see, there's a lot of pages and we're going to be here for a while. This is going to be quite lengthy video, I'd say. So let's start off with special rules. Every race and faction that has a book will normally have special rules. This is to further differentiate them from, well, pretty much any other playable army. Now, this isn't the only factor which does decide which army is unique or not. In fact, the whole book is what makes everything so different, but the special rules add in some specific flavor. We'll start off with Scurry Away. The Skaven embody the adage, he who runs away lives to fight another day. All models in the Skaven army add +1 to the totaled roll to determine the distance they flee. So essentially, this means that you get to run away a bit faster, and this happens if you choose to flee when someone's charging you, or say for example if you break from combat, you need to flee. It can help, but it also can be a bit of an issue. So this is why it's very useful. If you're trying to flee, enemies can try and overcharge you, and that means that they can delete the entire unit no matter how many models there are in there. So what this does, it gives you a better chance of escaping, which really does help, mostly because you want to get out of there, you don't want them to catch up to you, and I've had this save me. It's a passive rule, so there's no ways about this, you have to scurry away, but it does have a bit of an issue when you're running away and you've not been able to bring your troops back yet through morale. The extra inch, whether it's once or a few times, could lead to you, well, running away from the table and thus destroying the unit, so you have to hope that your morale is high enough anyway. Though, as it stands, it's the best thing that could work, especially if, say, for example, you're fighting against anything which is on foot. If they've got stuff with Swift Ride and stuff like that, you're screwed. But generally, it's a rule that you need to keep remembering, especially if you're trying to get away. Strength in numbers is the next special rule, and yeah, it might seem like it's really daunting because it's quite a lot of text, but it's actually rather simple. Skaven are not brave by nature, but do take courage from other beings in large packs from their own kind. All units in the Skaven army add their current rank bonus to their leadership value for any leadership-based test. So it's rather simple. We've got a little bit more information here, so let's just go into that and then I'll go into like my explanation of it. To calculate the leadership of a unit with the strength in numbers rule, first determine the unit's leadership as normal and then add the rank bonus of that unit to this value up to a maximum of leadership 10. Actually, the important thing is to first check your army book to see if the selected unit does have strength in numbers, as some of them do not. So it continues here. For example, a 15 model strong unit of clan rats leadership 5 deployed in 3 ranks of 5 would receive a +2 rank bonus for a total leadership of 7. It's important to note that when you're determining these things, your first rank does not really add to a rank bonus. If a chieftain, leadership 6, led the unit, the value would go up to a leadership of 8. If the unit was within 12 inches of a warlord, that was the Skaven General, leadership 7, the unit would go up to leadership 9. So how this works is more ranks is better, and this is why if you used to see those games or used to play, you would see loads and loads of ranks. The general thing is a lot of Skaven players would take around 10 ranks of slaves or clan rats, and it was pretty much just that to add in with your characters that you might have in the unit. So you've got the further information here that note that a Skaven General confers his basic leadership, and then units modify it with their own rank bonus. Any bonuses from the ranks of the General's unit is not passed on to units within 12 inches, so your General will get bonuses, and he will confer bonuses to anything within 12 inches, but he will not have his altered leadership passed on to everyone else, which makes sense. There's a little bit more to the rule, but we're going to talk about some things. This is why you would see so many Skaven bringing big ranks. Strength in numbers was their big thing. You could pretty much have basic clan rats with leadership 10, which was really, really good, especially when playing in 8th edition, because Steadfast really meant that your clan rats would be at leadership 10 baseline. As long as you had more ranks than the enemy, you would be able to just pretty much stay there. Yeah, the Skaven actually ended up being some of the biggest tanks in Warhammer 8th. The units would die, yes, but as long as you were steadfast and you had leadership 10, you pretty much were golden. But this is where we go back to scurry away when it comes to the last bit of strength in numbers. If for any reason a Skaven unit loses its rank bonus, it also loses its leadership bonus. For instance, fleeing units do not have a rank bonus, so fleeing Skaven must use their basic leadership. So this is where the Skaven players start to suffer if they're fleeing, because, yeah, clan rats, baseline leadership 5, well, depending if you have characters, sometimes you wouldn't have characters, it really depends, but you could see that the bit of a problem starts to come here, because if you're fleeing and you want to come back, you need to roll to your basic leadership, unless the unit is under 25%. But that means that you have to roll with 2 dice and hope that you get 5 or lower. Law of averages would mean that that would be very uncommon because, you know, it's 2 die. So in certain cases, you might find yourself fleeing and not coming back. This is a big reason why I tend to not use Rad Ogres when I play tabletop, because it is very, very noticeable. They'll do a few hits, they'll lose rank, and yeah, they'll start running and not come back. Now, if you're wondering why the Skaven army is so expensive on tabletop, it's mostly because of this. Between strength in numbers and low model point cost, you probably spent a lot of money to build up your Skaven force. I know I did, and yeah, I mean, loads and loads and loads of different clan rat models, Skaven slaves, characters. It's something that you need to experiment a lot. It's an army which I would tell people during that time, of course, that, yeah, don't play Skaven unless you're willing to drop at least double the amount of what you normally expect when it comes to building up an army. Next, we're going to move on to Verminus Valor. So this was a pretty fun rule. Skaven characters with this rule can refuse a challenge with no loss of honor. Other races see such acts as cowardly, but Skaven view a commander scampering to safety and dooming those underneath him as a leader's natural right. If a Skaven character refuses a challenge, the model is placed in the back rank as normal. However, the unit may still use the Skaven's character leadership or battle standard ability even after the character has been moved to the back. So, mainly, this kept your characters safe. Your characters are relatively squishy, even the ones that you build up to be quite powerful. Your spellcasters are going to be quite the target in most cases. Again, this would keep your characters alive, and it was very beneficial to you as you wanted them, especially them being your most expensive models on the battlefield, you wanted them to keep alive. Still, you would get all the benefits of pretty much everything else. The fact is with the Skaven is you're trying to outnumber your enemy, so yeah, this does help. This really was something that was quite beneficial. It's very rare that you're going to build up a Skaven Warlord to do damage, or maybe even a Battle Standard Bearer. You just want them to generate buffs. That's the main thing. You wanted them to generate as many buffs as possible. And lastly, we have Warpstone Weapon, which is rather basic. Skaven often use the highly unstable magical energies of Warpstone to create devilishly deadly weapons. Attacks from weapons with this special rule count as magical. It's pretty much just a way to be able to get some magical weapons. It very much depends if you want magical weapons or not. There are some cases where you won't want them. So, for example, if you're fighting against, say, dwarfs, they can get a ward save from it, so yeah, you don't want that too. But it depends. It really much depends. This is more suited towards the player more than anything else. Before we move on to specific rules for different units and characters, we've got the Scavenge pile, which is an addition to being able to get some special items to upgrade your characters and so on. Now, they were relatively cheap, which was a good thing, and it gave you different bonuses, different effects, and it really much depended on your general playstyle. Now you can see the point values over there and what they exactly do. War Musket was something that mainly did not get used a lot, mainly because of unstable ammunition, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Then there was Poison Attacks, which was quite good if you were going for a Clan Pestilence theme. Tail Weapon was always good if you want like a bit of a duelist, but even though it was kind of weak. Warp Lock Pistol was decent if you were trying to build up with a bunch of engineers. Even then, it was kind of a bit risky. And then there was Rat Hound Bodyguard. What you will notice from some of these rules, more specifically pretty much anything that's a extra weapon with unstable ammunition, or even the Rat Hound, is that they could bite you. Essentially, it can do damage to you, which, yeah, is very Skaven. You'll notice this a lot when it comes to Skaven players. A lot of them will end up taking damage because they do damage to themselves. The main thing is if you wanted to play Skaven on the tabletop, you had to be prepared to do damage to yourself. You were not going to be the most competitive unless you meta-focused, which a lot of players, including myself, tried to do. But if you used all the fun stuff, yeah, you would do a lot of damage to yourself. It was an unfortunate thing. The Skaven had the most types of misfires throughout the whole thing. So another point to tell players before they started picking up the Skaven army book was more, if you want to play, it's going to cost a lot of money, and be prepared to have a lot of things just shoot at you. So we're going to start talking about the units now, and there's a lot to talk about. Keep in mind that the clan rats also do have additional weapons teams that you can have, so Poisonwing Moulders and all that, but we'll talk about them when we get to them later on. So, clan rats are your most basic unit, costing 4 points per model, very, very cheap, and you had to bring them in units of 20 upwards. So, yeah, just the box. But in most cases, 20 would only be a +3 to your rank bonus, and you wanted to have a lot more, so usually the minimum was groups of 40, but I've seen people go all the way up to groups of 60. My middle point was around groups of 50, just to make sure I always had a bonus. Stat-wise, they were okay. Keep in mind that this is your core unit. This is something that you would have been using a lot. So while it might not look great, because, you know, weapon skill 3, strength 3, toughness 3 is not awesome, it's something that you have so many attacks coming out that it does kind of average out. Initiative 4 was decent, but in most cases you would be either fighting at the same time as others, or in some cases, hitting first. This is against, say, lizardmen, dwarfs, maybe some undead, depending on if they have buffs or not. But yeah, you're very average. Special rules all remain the same, and equipment baseline is a hand weapon and light armor, meaning that you had a 6-up armor save. That was okay. Now, this is when it gets a bit more complicated, so you can see additional equipment is spears and shields, but they were half a point, which meant that, yeah, building up Skaven lists when it came to half points and so on became a bit complicated. This was back in the day before we had stuff like Battlescribe. Eventually apps did start getting released and it made things a lot easier, but remember that most list building back in the day was done pen to paper, so mathematics was very important. Spears would allow you to attack from an extra rank, and shields would give you a bit more to your armor save and give you a parry save, which was essentially a melee based ward save. It was quite good, even though it was just a 6-up. You wanted shields in most cases. Spears, it very much depended on what you were planning to do with the clan rats, but that meant that you could either spend a lot of money to have a lot of different variants, or just do half and half and then just put them in the front rank depending on what you were using. In most cases, people would have to do that because this was not a cheap army. 4 points per model is cheap. Keep in mind that the standard format for games was 2,000 points per army, and most tournament teams did, what, 2,400 per army? And given the fact that you needed 25% to be core, that's a lot of clan rats if you're going for a clan rat focus. There's other things to do, but generally, if you wanted a big, beefy line just to hold down your enemies, clan rats were the best way. It was always fun writing lists, well, frustrating writing lists using a calculator and just going bit by bit. Thankfully, this isn't an issue now, but you can see what the problem was back in the day. Storm Vermin are another core unit, and they were pretty good, especially if you want to go for a more elite focus. They had better stats all around. The strength might not be that good, but keep in mind that they used a halberd too, so they had a natural +1 to their strength. They had heavy armor, which meant that they had a 5-up armor save, so all around they were pretty good. And you could use them in much smaller units, starting off at just a basic 10+ unit. 7 points a model, also, yes, a bit more expensive. Each Storm Vermin almost outdid every clan rat in every shape, way, or form, because more weapon strength, more general strength, more initiative, meaning that they fight faster. They generally would fight a lot faster, even against basic humans, so these would be ones that would be fighting first. You could upgrade them to make them 8 points a model, and that meant that you could have them down to a 4-up armor save. This was at the cost of an extra point, which meant that they were 8 points a model. Fairly expensive for Skaven, but still easy enough to bring quite a lot. Now, the great thing is that the Storm Vermin themselves were very useful if you wanted a big block of something that could hold back and deal damage at the same time. Again, strength in numbers meant that you wouldn't be bringing them in groups of 10, especially if you were playing tournaments. You wanted to bring them in groups of 30, 40, more or less that's how I would see them being brought themselves. I myself preferred clan rats, but Storm Vermin were quite cool. depending on what you were fighting against. Now, they did have other benefits which made them quite unique. For example, the Storm Vermin, you could have one of your units of Storm Vermin having a magical banner, so you could get one of the magical banners that you either have access to or those in the Big Red Book. There was a 50-point limit here, so you wouldn't be getting all the cool banners, but you were able to get a few benefits there. And your Fang Leader, which was your commander of this specific unit, if you decided to upgrade the commander, then could also get stuff from the scavenge pile up to 15 points. I'll be honest with you, I saw this more as a point sink than anything else. Most of the stuff had unstable ammunition, so it could fight back, and I didn't see a lot of value with that. Plus, you know, you want more numbers. 15 points is, well, almost to Storm Vermin, or if you clan rats, if you need to just boost up the ranks of your clan rats. So I wouldn't see that as very useful. Again, they could have weapons teams, which we're going to talk about later, but generally Storm Vermin are good. If you want something that's going to be up there, fairly heavy armored, keep in mind that Skaven heavy armor does not really show up often. This is probably some of the best armor saves that you're going to ever have, other than beefing up a character. You're going to want to use these if you want to have a block that will hold down and be able to dish out some damage. In most cases, clan rats are usually the best, but Storm Vermin are pretty decent. So this is when we get into something very unique, and a lot of people are going to be very surprised here. Skaven Slaves, 2 points per model. Yeah, extremely cheap, and again, referencing the fact that most basic games were around 2,000 points and tournaments were 2,400. 2 points per model. Yeah, very, very expensive. Now, how it worked here is that the Skaven Slaves were trash. They were complete trash in terms of stats, but they were very, very useful in game. So again, units had to be 20 or more. They would have hand weapons, or you could then upgrade them a little bit to give them spears, shields, slings. So the cheapest is 2 points. The most expensive, I believe, would be 3 points a model, or you could go 2.5 points, and yeah, that starts complicating things. You could get a lot of benefit from the Skaven Slaves, considering the fact that, yes, they had Scurry Away, Strength in Numbers, so you could get them up to Leadership 10. Their baseline is Leadership 2, though. You can see from their stats, they are very, very weak in general. However, if you knew how to stack up leadership bonuses, you could get them with Leadership 10, and it would be your weakest, but, you know, your most cost-effective block ever, because yeah, 2 points a model. This would mean that you always had access to stuff like Steadfast, especially because, you know, 8th edition, and generally you could always keep your enemies locked in combat. This is actually a quite good thing, but it was just very annoying because, again, it was very expensive. How it works nowadays is that you get the clan rat boxes and you turn them into slaves, and even then, you know, it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff that you need. You'd want to bring them in groups of 40, 50, 60, just to be able to hold down your enemy. And yeah, it's the issue about the leadership. That's the main thing. However, some special rules did come into effect which made you want to bring Skaven Slaves. Expendable being that all Skaven except other Skaven Slaves automatically pass panic tests caused by Skaven Slaves. So this is a good thing. If your slaves start dying out and start having to rout and so on, yeah, your other units, your clan rats, your storm vermin, they don't care. They really don't care. But this is when it gets better. Also, Skaven can voluntarily target ranged attacks at enemy units engaged in close combat with Skaven Slaves, but no other friendly troops. As combatants are normally in constant motion, all successful hits must be randomized between the fighting units, 1 to 3 for friend, 4 to 6 for foe. If there are multiple units, further randomized to determine exactly which one is struck. So, why was this so good? Essentially, yes, you are killing your own Skaven Slaves, but if you had a pretty powerful gun line, you could easily decide, yeah, I'm going to take out that unit of Longbeards, so I'm going to make my slaves hold those units of Longbeards, and then I'm going to fire constantly, meaning that my slaves will take damage, but those very terrifying Longbeards will be held down. Same thing with maybe Chaos Warriors, Chaos Chosen, anything that is a bit of a big damage output. So I'll tell you something funny. I had this happen way back in the day where I was playing against someone playing Lizardmen. I was able to lock down his Temple Guard with my Skaven Slaves and just completely fire in with pretty much anything else I had. Yes, my slaves got obliterated, but so did his Temple Guard. It was, a rather strange game. And next we've got Cornered Rats. This is another special rule for them. So, desperate Skaven Slaves can be vicious. Should a Skaven Slave unit break from combat, all units within D6, friend or foe, immediately take D3 strength 3 hits. Another hit is added to the total rolled for each additional rank of slaves after the first one. The broken unit, including any characters that joined them, are then removed, just as if they had been wiped out in close combat. So, yeah, this is a big thing. Essentially, you'll be doing a lot of damage. If you've got a lot of enemies around, they'll take a lot of hits. And if you've got a lot of allies around your own units, they'll take a lot of hits too. Especially if you're going to go for a lot of ranks, like if you go by 40 or 60. This is kind of what I do, so yeah, this can be a bit of a clutch. The thing is, yeah, you can see, Skaven Slaves don't break. They just break fully, they disappear. And yeah, you want your slaves in combat, so you want to make use of stuff like, well, you know, strength in numbers and all that. And if you have weak, small groups, like say, for example, a group of 20, which is only going to have leadership 5 if there are no characters present, and this is before they take damage, which will reduce their bonuses, you can already see the bit of an issue there. So you need to spend a lot of money, and that's why a lot of people don't bring slaves. It's mainly because they're just that costly in terms of real money, not points. All in all, equipment-wise, everything works. Having some slings means that you can fire a little bit of a distance away. It's not great distance. Having spears means that you'll be able to actually do some damage on extra ranks, and having shields gives you the only armor save that you're going to have, 6 up plus the parry save, and you can't parry save with shields, so you kind of have to make sure you're planning what you're fighting against, so you know how to build up your slaves. Okay, let's move on now to the Night Runners, another core unit. Stat-wise, not so great. They actually have 2 attacks, by the way, because they come baseline with 2 hand weapons, not just 1. 7 points a model, which makes them still fairly cheap. Well, everything for the Skaven, at least the grand majority, is very cheap, so you've already got there. You've got some throwing stars as baseline, which means that you have a very short-range weapon, but if you want slings to have better range, you can upgrade them for 1 point extra per model, and that gives you a pretty decent range. It's still like very low. With the Skaven you want guns, but hey, it still gives you a range unit. You can also upgrade them to have a weapons team with a warp grinder, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Generally quite good. Strength in numbers, scurry away. I like them in general, though you don't get the benefit of full command such as a banner bearer or a musician. Now, you can upgrade them to have a knight leader, which increases the stats a little bit, but generally there's no point. Mainly because of the special rules, and yeah, let's just check it out here. First we've got dodge. We're going to go through the bottom one first because that's the only one linked to the knight leader. It gives him a 6-up ward, and yeah, like I said, it's pointless. You are paying for an extra character, well, unit champion, better yet said, and it's the only one that actually has access to a ward save, so it's pretty worthless, at least in my opinion. However, they do have a very nice rule with Slinking Advance, which is immediately after both sides have deployed all their forces, units of Night Runners can make a normal move, not a march or a charge. They must remain more than 12 inches away from any enemy models at the end of their move, and it's pretty good. That's an extra 6-inch charge. This means that if you want them to move around to just try and circle around your enemy, or if you want them to get up to the front so you can start trying to hold down anything, this works out quite well. I must admit, over the years of playing Skaven, I generally don't use Night Runners, mainly because Gutter Runners are a bit better. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but I can see their uses, and it's always nice to have a few extra range options, even though it's probably not the best range option anyway. It's just that you're very limited with the Skaven. It's something that if you're going to go for a theme army, perfect, then you've got a core for a theme clan Eshin army. It's more for fluff than I would say competitive. If anyone else does use them to a more competitive degree, do let me know. But in general, I just never saw too much of a use regarding any of these types of units. So now we're going to talk about Giant Rats, and this is where things get a little bit strange. So first up, Giant Rats are 3 points per model, and a Packmaster, which you need to include for other benefits, are 8 points per model. You need to go by a minimum and then go from there. Stat-wise, both of them are quite good, but it's 2 different things. Mixed units have a bit of an issue because, well, it's very hard to kind of deal with in some cases. So at the minimum, you have to bring 1 Packmaster and at least 5 Giant Rats. So already very cheap anyway, because, you know, Giant Rats, they mirror the Clan Rats in terms of stats, so they're pretty good for 1 point less. Yeah, no light armor and all that type of stuff, because, well, it's a Giant Rat. But they are very useful, and there's good ways to use them on the tabletop. Now, you have to keep expanding on this, and you can bring in extra Packmasters, but the issue is that because it's a mixed unit, they get attacked in a certain way where attacks get mixed up, and it could just kill the Packmasters directly, so you lose the benefits already. I don't know when it comes to these things. I use them, I really do, mainly because they're so cheap, and because they're so cheap, you can have a few of them just to fill out some extra points that you may have and get some extra damage out. Giant rats themselves don't have any classification, so they don't count as core, they don't count as rare or special, they're just nothing, which means that you need to use these just to basically use points that you have spare. That's it. That's literally it. Their rules do make them fairly interesting, so obviously we've got Packmaster here. So long as at least a single Packmaster or Master Moulder is alive, a unit of giant rats may use his leadership and the strength in numbers rule, so you could really have a lot of different rats and get the benefit from that. But again, it's a bit of a clutch. But anyways, let's carry on. If a unit of giant rats begins a turn without at least one Packmaster or Master Moulder, they will move as quickly as possible towards the nearest enemy unit in their line of sight, charging if they can. If they have no visible targets, they will reform and face the closest foe. So yeah, they've just got to be in combat if they don't have any Packmasters. It's useful if you want to be aggressive, and generally you do want to be aggressive. They're not really a tactical unit. Well, the tactic is to just hold the enemy down. These were normally seen as rat darts, so you could just have them there in a few ranks and just hold the enemy for a while. That's all they were pretty much there for. And the last unique rule that they do have, keep in mind that the Skaven have a lot of unique rules, was Wave of Rats. In combat, giant rats literally crawl over each other in their savage eagerness to attack the foe. Any giant rat in a second rank can fight if it's immediately behind a model that is engaged in close combat. The extra rank cannot fight to the side or rear, but only to the front. So yeah, you get a little bit of a benefit, you get some extra attacks, which is pretty good considering that they're not great stats, but they're fairly decent. I like rat darts. It's just very hard to justify them unless you have, well, just spare points. So we'll talk about the Packmasters and Master Moulders now, as they're linked to the giant rats and they're also linked to the Rad Ogres. So I'll probably do the Rad Ogres next, mainly because they're not really their own unit. They're part of a unit. It's a very strange thing, which worked out quite well, but was a bit of a clutch in some cases. So you needed them there whether you wanted them or not, and they could actually be quite useful, especially if you just decided to upgrade them to Master Moulders. We'll talk about them straight after this. But in general, they allowed you to have strength in numbers, very, very useful. You can see the mixed unit rule is here and how it actually works, which is what causes the issue. Packmasters and Master Moulders lead units of giant rats or Rad Ogres. They can't leave their unit or join another. Missile units and impact hits against mixed units are randomized as follows. Roll a d6, and on a 1 or a 4, a giant rat is hit. On a 5 or a 6, a Packmaster is hit. The rest is there if you decide to add in a Master Moulder, then you have to further increase the randomization and so on. The problem is that you're mostly moving your giant rats in, and they're going to take a while to get there. 6 movement is fantastic, because 6 inches is quite a long area to move around through the board. But if you're fighting, say, anything that has range, so Empire, High Elves, Wood Elves, pretty much anything, well, most things in game have some sort of range, they will take out your Packmaster before anything, which kind of renders the giant rats a little bit useless, because they won't be able to use strength in numbers. It's a double-edged sword. You can use these with Rad Ogres too, and it's very much the same way. It's a weird thing, because I love giant rats. I think that they're absolutely awesome. I hate the Packmaster because it adds to this effect, which is a quite strong negative, and it happens a lot when it comes to the Skaven, where maybe too many negatives and not enough positives. Mind you, the positives are very, very strong. It's very hard to balance these types of things, I imagine, especially in 7th edition when this book was written, where a lot of weird things happened in the 7th. Now you can upgrade the Packmasters to be Master Moulders, which were a bit better in terms of stats. They could have a few more options too, like you can see here. A great weapon or a Things Catcher. You could also get some stuff from the Scavenge pile and or the Clan Moulder Beast Prods. This is a separate item thing, which we'll talk about better. So essentially, the Master Moulder itself could be a character of your own creating, which was really interesting. It was something really cool. Unfortunately, it's because they suffered through the issue of having to be with a unit, and then they would easily be targeted because of the randomization. There was always a chance of them dying out sooner, and yeah, it's not a great thing. Though, mind you, if you're going to run Rad Ogres, I would say that you'd want to bring Master Moulders anyway. When it comes to Rad Ogres, I mean, I'm going to be very honest, I don't like them. We'll talk about them a little bit later. But I've seen some people use them quite well, so it could just be my experiences. Either way, you've got a lot, especially when you start looking towards like the special items. So these are the weapons they have access to. The whip itself is rather good because you can fight from a number of ranks back and keep them safe in melee combat. It's just the danger of when you're being attacked by range. Or the Things Catcher is, well, amazing, in all honesty. This is something that I really like because it gives you Killing Blow, that allows you to do more damage against monsters, pretty much just taking them out. I'm a big fan of Things Catchers, so you get a lot of benefits. You do get a lot of benefits. Then there's the case of these special rules. So we've got running with a pack. While leading Rad Ogre packs with at least a single Rad Ogre alive, Packmasters and Master Moulders are immune to fear. However, they are too busy keeping up to ever count their numbers for rank bonus, so they're immune to fear, which is very useful as, well, fear is a weird thing when it comes to tabletop, as it makes you worse to deal damage as it takes your weapon skill down to 1, and yeah, it's not like, for example, Total War, if you're more used to Total War, where it just kind of hits your leadership a little bit. This, it makes you so much worse at melee combat, it's unreal. And the fact that they can't help with rank bonus, yes, it's a negative, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense. They're on a 20 mil base, whereas Rad Ogres are on 40 mil, so yeah, it makes sense that they couldn't really fill a rank for that. Which is a bit of a shame. You will be with a clutch, but it depends on how you actually release your Rad Ogres and how you have them. And finally, this is quite good. They do get Verminus Valor, so although they are champions, not characters, Master Moulders have Verminus Valor. That's actually quite good because keeping your Master Moulders alive is possibly one of the best things that you can do, and having them being able to avoid challenges, which is a really important thing, as generally some people will be smart to challenge them, and that way you can just kind of deal with the Rad Ogres a bit easier. You can now just say no, which is always a great thing. Mind you, most deployment, I believe, is best to put the Master Moulder at the back, as far as I remember, at the very least. So it could be a bit redundant because they won't be at the front. Mind you, Rad Ogres do get killed. I don't know, it's a very strange thing. I'll be very honest, it's just very, very hard to justify Rad Ogres through my experience, but I do know people who use them and swear by them, so it depends on the player more than anything. So we're going to jump into the Rad Ogres now, and this one's quite important. The thing is, I don't like Rad Ogres. I've had some very terrible luck with them. We can see that they've got loads of great rules though, but I've just had terrible, terrible luck with them. I'm not too sure why. 40 points a model puts them at quite expensive, considering that a lot of other stuff isn't really that expensive, even a lot of stuff that has a better damage output and so on. But 8 points per Packmaster, then you'll have to obviously upgrade them to become Master Moulders, and for 15 points you can upgrade a Rad Ogre to be Master Bred for a bit more damage, basically better weapon skill, and an extra attack. It's not really a lot of stuff, in all honesty. Like, their weapon skill in general is kind of bad, but it kind of evens out with their possible attacks. However, they just had, say, 4 weapon skill baseline, and the Master Bred had 5. I think they'd be a bit more viable. And it's not me complaining, well, it is me complaining, mainly just, I have a lot of Rad Ogres, I think they're really cool, I've got a lot of them, and I want to use them more, but it's just very hard to justify. And you see they get extra attacks anyway, because they've got the free baseline, but then they've got Frenzy, so that means 4, they cause fear, which is great, you don't have a lot of stuff which does cause fear, and yeah, you know, you get the benefits of having the Packmaster or Master Moulder. It's better to have the Master Moulder. Now, they do have their own unique ability, known as Beast Pack, which is as long as at least a single Packmaster or Master Moulder is alive, a unit of Rad Ogres can still use his leadership and strength in numbers rule. Additionally, if a unit of Rad Ogres begins a friendly turn without at least one Packmaster or Master Moulder, they must take a stupidity test. So again, it's a bit of an issue because a stupidity test is really bad and not a lot of stuff with the Skaven have it. It's a rule that kind of screws you over, with your leadership only being leadership 5 and having no strength in numbers at that point because you don't have a Packmaster or Master Moulder. It's a bit strange. Like, I love the Skaven book, believe me, it's one of my favorites, but yeah, it's not great. I don't know, hopefully for Old World things change and they make the Rad Ogres a bit better, but they're just not great at the moment. Okay, so now we're going to talk about rat swarms, and yeah, they're that simple. This is literally all they have. They're just literal swarms of rats, not like the giant rats, but even smaller, and, 25 points per base. You need to have at least 2, which takes you up to 50 points. They're unbreakable, they're small, so they will take damage from basically being trampled. Yes, that's a thing. But the main thing is that they're there to hold. They've got 5 wounds. You want them there just to hold down your enemy. They're cheap and they're able to do that. They're pretty much just a doorstop. And yeah, I know that might not sound exciting, but they're actually very, very useful. And I've used them quite often when it comes to battles. Anytime I'm getting up there to play, they can hold down the enemy. 6 movement is pretty good too, just to make sure that maybe if something I need to get into position takes a turn or 2, I can hold them down for at least a turn. Usually 2, depending on how everything works, because they still have 3 weapon strength, so it's not too bad. Their toughness is 2 though, so it's very, very weak. They will be very, very squishy, but in general, I'd say that rat swarms are fantastic. I love using them and I continue to use them whenever I have the chance. Okay, let's talk about gutter runners, 12 points per model, and the reason why I don't pick night runners. You see, they're a special unit, so you can't take them as core, but they're quite good for what they are. So 12 points a model isn't too bad, especially for Skaven, and stat-wise they're not too bad at all. Keep in mind that they also have 2 attacks instead of 1 because they have 2 hand weapons. They also come with a baseline short range attack. You can bring them into units of 5 to 15, so yeah, there is a max for these. You're not trying to use strength in numbers here. In fact, these are your skirmishers. Skirmish units are more based on going around and capturing targets, or for example taking out any lone straggler stuff, so they're harder to hit because they'll be harder to shoot whilst on skirmish stance. They've got a bunch of special rules which we'll talk about in a bit. They've got a natural dodge which gives them a 6-up ward save. This is why it's better than night runners. And the leader has a 5-up because it's just better runner. You can see a bunch of potential upgrades such as the snare, which is free. This is just literally for free. Then you can have them with slings for an extra point per model. This allows them to be able to shoot from a further distance, or give them a poison attacks, which is 5 points per model. That's quite expensive, but poison attacks are super, super good. You can also increase the unit champion to be much stronger with either smoke bombs or weeping blades. The fact is that you can make these to be quite potent, and they are quite good at what they do. I honestly love running a few gutter runner units when I can. Sneaky infiltrators doesn't really need a lot of talking about because, well, it's a scout. It's essentially just the same scout rule, so that's fine. Snare nets are really, really cool because essentially, yes, you're getting rid of some attacks, but the fact is that you are removing weapon skill and initiative from possible enemies. The weapon skill is probably the best thing. The initiative, it depends on what you're fighting, because you've got 5 initiative. It's actually quite good. It depends on what exactly you're going to be dealing with. But for a free upgrade, you can't really go wrong, and anything else that has 5 initiative, which will be in the base there, base contact, so it's only going to be around 2 to 3 models depending on what you're fighting. Yeah, it's going to make them a bit slower, so you're going to be hitting first. Again, as you can note, they do have options to bring in a weapons team with them, as weapon teams want their own units, but we'll talk about them in a little bit. Plague Monks are by far one of the most simple units available in the Skaven roster, but by far one of my favorite. Honestly, I love Plague Monks. I have an ungodly amount of them. 7 points per model, decent stat line. Toughness 4 is fantastic for a Skaven, especially since it's not wearing any armor. It's got 2 hand weapons in Frenzy, which means it's actually going to be attacking with 3 attacks, not a baseline 1, and then the Bringer of Word, which is the commander, has 4 attacks. You're going to be getting a lot of attacks out there, and this is a faction that you're going to be wanting as many attacks as possible. So in the basic rank of 5, if you upgrade fully, that means that you're having a total of 21 attacks, which is absolutely fantastic. They've got no special rules attached to them, barring the fact that they can take a magical standard with them, up to 50 points of course, but believe me, having toughness 4 on Plague Monks is absolutely fantastic. Then if you pair that up with adding in a Plague Priest, you can make quite a good Death Star, sometimes 2 Plague Priests depending on what you're planning to do. But yeah, they're simple, they're cheap, and yeah, toughness 4, it's so important. Keep in mind that the baseline toughness and strength for a lot of miniatures, because it's like the most basic, is strength 3, toughness 3, and toughness 4 really does make it harder to just land that wound. You will take a lot of shooting attacks though. A lot of people will aim at the Plague Monks because they don't want to deal with Plague Monks in close combat, but you can't go wrong with Plague Monks. I absolutely love them. I think I have around 200-ish painted, especially since with certain lists and certain scenarios, you can pretty much take them as core, and it's absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, Plague Monks, perfect model. Okay, and now we're moving on to the Plague Sensor Bearers, which is 16 points per model, a base unit of 5+. They are pretty good in terms of stats. Once again, the toughness is a big thing here. 3 attacks per model. I know it says 2 there, but again, Frenzy is a big thing. We've got Hatred, which I think this is one of the only Skaven models with Hatred. And you can't have full command, so you can't have a banner and a musician, but you do have a Plague Champion, which is the Plague Chanter. I would say you don't really need the Chanter because it's an extra 13 points. It's quite expensive. But the unit itself is expensive, 16 points compared to pretty much anything else is quite big, and that's purely because of its weapon choices, and the fact that it's skirmish too, because skirmishing is just a great rule, and when you have it with something which can be considered a bit of a tank, yeah, you want these. So let's talk about the special rule Plague Disciples. These rabid disciples draw fanaticism from the presence of their clan Pestilence Brethren, the Plague Monks. A unit of Plague Sensor Bearers that is within 6 inches of a unit of Plague Monks may use their rank bonus of the Plague Monks to modify their own leadership. If the Sensor Bearers are within 12 inches of a Plague Furnace, they are stubborn. Okay, so when it comes to this means that you can have a unit of, say for example, 15 Sensor Bearers having leadership 10 because they're near Plague Monks. Because if you're going to bring Sensor Bearers, you might as well go with a whole Clan Pestilence feel. And it's not a bad list. In all honesty, you're going to have a very tanky Skaven army. So that's quite good. And then being stubborn if near a Plague Furnace is very, very good. So that means that they won't lose out on anything with regarding on leadership issues. It works out very well if you can pair them up. I think pairing them up is the best thing. So you're going to have Plague Monks and a Plague Furnace, which is more than doable. It is more than doable. Mind you, 8th edition did have some issues, so this could only work really on fluffy games, not competitive games, because, yeah, the Plague Furnace would be shot down by end of turn 2 at the very least. But then we have the Plague Sensor itself, so this is an interesting weapon because it's got its own special rules. This is the weapon itself. A Plague Sensor is a warpstone weapon and counts as a flail with the following additional rules to cover the deadly fog that surrounds such a vile weapon. So before that, it's a warpstone weapon, so it's got magical attacks, always keep that in mind, and a flail means that it has extra strength to do damage, which is obviously very, very good. But this is where things get a little bit more complicated. At the beginning of any close combat phase, all models, friend or foe, in base contact with one or more models bearing a Plague Sensor must take a toughness test or suffer a single wound with no armor save allowed. That's actually really good. This means that a model need only take a single such toughness test in each round of combat, regardless of the number of Plague Sensors that it might be adjacent to. Remember, all such wounds count for combat resolution. Wounds caused by the fog are resolved before impact hits, issuing challenges and revealing assassins. All Clan Pestilence models, that is, Plague Monks, Plague Priests, Plague Sensor Bearers, Plague Furnace, Lord Stroke, and the Plague Core Catapult only suffer a wound on a roll of 6. So first up, your stuff will be safer because you're just kind of naturally a bit better to dealing with plagues. Second up, this is massive. So say for example, you're dealing with, let's say, Knightly Orders. Knightly Orders of the Empire have a natural 1-up armor save. They're very, very strong. They can, well, take a lot of damage. It's going to be very hard to kill them. Even if you have a -1 or -2 to an armor save with your weapons and so on, this can basically just delete them if they fail their toughness test. So if they have a low toughness, then yeah, this could easily do a lot of damage. And I've seen it do a lot of damage against Chaos Warriors who have quite a high armor save, so you want to just take them out naturally. This works out quite well. The Plague Sensor in general is just super, super cool, and you have to keep an eye that this can do damage to you. So if you lock it up to, say, for example, some clan rats, they will start to die too, and it depends on everything that's obviously in base contact, but base contact can do a lot of damage depending on how you're positioned, and yeah, but still, these are a great unit. I love Plague Sensor Bearers purely because the Plague Sensor is just so brutal. Now we're going to move on to Warplock Giselles. Now, these are a really cool unit because it's a sniper team, but it's also a squad, so you can do a lot of damage. You don't want to upgrade them to sharpshooters because it doesn't really make any sense. Yes, you get an extra attack and all that type of stuff, but you want them far away, you don't want them close for, well, the fact is that they're still squishy, they're still Skaven after all. So the reason why these are so popular is because of their special weapon. It's 36 range, which is absolutely massive. It's a strength 6 weapon, and it does a lot of damage taking away from an armor save. It's just so good in general. It's unstable ammunition though, however, and this is why I always have a bit of an issue writing Skaven lists. I've said this earlier on in the video, but mainly it's because, well, you can see here, if something goes wrong, you can take damage, and yeah, it happens. This is a lot of stuff with Skaven. A lot of guns have unstable ammunition, and you can then start having stuff blow up on you, which is a bit of an issue. It's risky, and they are fairly expensive. You know, the 20 points per model. For Skaven, that's a lot. However, I'd say that it's worth a shot. It's worth having, say, for example, 5 of them, because that means that you could get a lot of damage out. You can bring them on teams for free, and yeah, that works out quite well. It really depends on how you specifically play, but having such a long range to snipe stuff out of the way works out quite well. I've always had this to point out, say, for example, Nightly Orders or anything like a big monster, which I'll want to start doing damage to before they get to me because they might have fear or terror. So this does work out quite well. They've got a natural 4-up armor save, which might not seem as good because, you know, it's a ranged weapon, but a lot of people will aim it, so having a bit of an armor save does help. Though it's part of the baseline model, so you shouldn't really complain. I think they work out quite well. I like Warp Block Jezzails, I have quite a few of them. It's hard to justify sometimes, but if you need something to do a really long shot, 36 inches is so good, yeah, you want to bring Jezzails. Okay, let's talk about Poisonwing Globalears, because they are rather special. Unit from 5 to 15, so there is a maximum here, but these are a damage dealer, mainly because of their special rules. 10 points per model also is quite cheap, so that's not too bad, and you can upgrade one to a Bombardier by 5 points, and you can upgrade that Bombardier even further to give them a Death Glow to 25 points extra. It's a bit expensive, but you'll see why. So when it comes to that, you've got the special rules, the first one being Life is Cheap. So, Poisonwing Globalears are allowed to fire into combat, providing the Globalears are not in base contact with a foe. They can target any enemy unit within range and line of sight, even if that unit is engaged in combat. As combatants are constantly in motion, all successful hits must be randomized between the fighting units. 1, 2, 3 is friend, 4, 5, 6 is foe, and if there's multiple units, then you have to start like randomizing a bit further. But the reason why you want to be able to do that is because the Poisonwing Globes themselves, well, they're pretty strong. So how it works is that they're Warpstone weapons. Once again, magical, yeah? And they wound the target on a roll of a 4+. There's no anything else. There's no toughness, there's no nothing. And how it works is that no armor saves are allowed. So once again, this is quite a strong blender, which you can take up close and personal just if you need to. The issue is that on a roll of a 1, on a 2-hit roll, it can then fall on you, and then on a roll of 5+, then it can do damage on you. So you could have a really bad roll and have your unit being destroyed by your own means, but hey, it's a risk that you usually take when you play as a Skaven. I've said it once and I'll say it again, if you're going to play Skaven, you either, well, you're going to spend a lot of money and you're going to be basically playing with a lot of risk, and yeah, that's the fun part. Anyways, let's move on to the last rule, which is volley from the back. If the Globalears are themselves in combat, models in base contact with the foe fight with their hand weapons, but unengaged models can lob missiles into their own unit's melee as described below. When the skirmishing unit forms up to fight close combat, unengaged models, even those in the rear ranks, are allowed to fire into their own combat during the shooting phase. Shots must still be in range of the enemy. All shots taken without line of sight to the target suffer -1 to hit penalty. That's the usual stuff. And then you've got to randomize all the damage. Yeah, so it's one of the more units that can be a bit more daring. That's probably the best way to say it without getting demonetized. But yeah, essentially you can have your units do damage to yourself, and it's a risk that you need to take. Mind you, when you're playing Skaven, I mean, you're gonna play Skaven, right? So before we go into the next section, I want to talk about weapons teams, mainly because I wanted them to have their own section. As you can see, they are an attached unit, so they have to be purchased as an upgrade to, say, Clan Rats, Night Runners, pretty much anything that allows for it. There are different types of weapons teams, and you would have seen before when we were talking about all the different units, they have a set section which says, yeah, you can buy a Gatling gun, well, Rattling gun, or a Poisonwing mortar. It very much depends because it's locked to that, and they have to be near your other units. So what you purchased it with, it needs to be there. Now, you can have them kind of go about and be a single entity, but yeah, you want them near because you want the rank bonus, you want the leadership and all that type of stuff. It's one of the issues with the weapons teams where you're stuck keeping them as close as possible, and they can get targeted very easily because of that, depending on what you're bringing them with. But I would say that weapons teams are very useful, especially once we start going into everything regarding each of the specific weapons teams. Keep in mind, once again, they can turn back and fire on you. So the Warp Fire Thrower is one of my favorites, mainly because while it's very short range, only having a range of 1 artillery dice, its strength is 5, it does D3 damage, -2 to a save. This attacks with a flame template, which means that you can actually get quite a decent amount of enemies stuck behind it, and you can do a lot of damage. It's very, very good against hordes. Like, very, very good against hordes. I've had it used against me, I've used it against enemies. It is just absolutely great. Not only that, but after you do damage, you can throw a panic test into the mix, so yeah, you can do a lot of damage, and it's got a rapid reaction, meaning that if it gets charged, it can stand and shoot. So, say for example, an enemy horde of zombies, skeletons, anything like that, you can do a lot of damage to them. Or a big block of, say, Imperial Greatswords, which is very, very common. You can pretty much do a lot of damage, especially if you're at the point where the flame template gets a lot of them. You can essentially just, yeah, delete units. It's great. You will notice that there's a misfire chart. Now, misfires aren't uncommon because, well, pretty much any war machine has misfires, but all the weapons teams pretty much have it too, which is where the issue comes, because they're quite cheap and they can turn around and do quite a lot of damage. So 1 to 2, if you roll on a misfire, then that could do a lot of damage with a large template around you and anything that is near you, which is generally going to be your other clan rats or your storm vermin, and yeah, you're going to hurt yourself. Fuel leak, you'll do a bit of damage there too, but not so much. And then on a 6, you're okay. They're just like chilling for a little bit. The problem is that, yeah, these are very common because you misfire because of the artillery dice, right? So that determines your range. It can go from 2 inches all the way up to 10 inches, which is on intervals of 2, or then the misfire. It's more common than you think. Maybe that's just my bad luck. But yeah, it happens a lot. I must say that I use them. I still use weapons teams often, mainly because they're just very funny, and yeah, you never know what's going to happen. But this is definitely the one with the highest damage output, I must say, and then we can move on to all the others. So then we've got the Rattler Gun, which is quite good, 18 inches, strength 4, damage 1, and -2 to a save, but it's the special rules which make it so much more unique. You see, you can get very greedy when it comes to Rattling Guns. We'll talk about the special rule now. Essentially, it's a move or fire weapon, but you can pivot on the spot to face the target to shoot, and that's fine. Warpstone weapon again, and yeah, magical. So this is a very common thing, especially with pretty much everything here. The next thing is how to actually get your number of shots. So what you have to do is nominate a target, right? And then you roll a d6. That will be the number of shots fired. Then you can decide to either stop if you're happy with the number of shots, or roll again, and you can keep doing so. If you roll any damage, any duplicate of the one of the numbers previously rolled, yeah, then you get a misfire. But essentially, you can get a lot of shots. You can, say for example, you're very lucky you roll a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, that's all the shots that you have. It's essentially close to unlimited shooting, essentially. Now, it's always been interpreted as rolling a double, so a lot of people have seen it, and this has been happening in tournaments too, and I think this is the main way to go. I don't use these too much because I've had it shoot back at me so much that I just kind of have PTSD. So you can keep rolling. You can keep rolling. That's the interpretation that a lot of people go, as long as you don't roll a double. So as long as you don't roll a 4 and then a 4 the next time, you essentially have unlimited shooting. But doubles are kind of common, and what happens then is that you have a misfire. But before we get into the misfire chart, there's a few things. Obviously, because you rapid fire, you would naturally do a -1 to hit, but because you are using a special weapon, you don't need to do that. And then the thing about penalties regarding short range and long range, I'm not too sure because it's highly been debated regarding how it works with a magical weapon. Again, this is the issue with Warhammer, that rules can be interpreted in so many different ways. But in general, yeah, they're pretty good. They can just cause a lot of damage to you. And yes, you can stand and shoot if charged, which I think is absolutely great. The misfire chart is where things get a little bit weird. Blam is it just explodes and it's removed from play. 3 to 5 spins wildly, and then it just fires, and the issue is that you're playing Skaven, so you're mostly going to be having a lot of board control, and then this can just fire at pretty much anything. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I've had this turned around and basically kill off a Gracier because, yeah, that's why I kind of not use this anymore. And then obviously 6 is you still got the shots, but it's weaker. It's a bit okay. I must say, again, if you're playing Skaven, you're playing with risk, but I've had this happen too many times to me. Doom Flares come in, and they're pretty cool themselves, mainly because they're mini Doom Wheels, and they're much more reliable, I'll just say that. With Strength 4, Artillery dice worth of attacks, damage 1, and -2 to the save, impacts it of D3. They're pretty good, mainly because, well, what you can see is here, it's Whirling Death, that's what determines your attacks. So you roll the artillery dice, you can get 2, 4, 6, 8, or 10, which is awesome because they're automatic hits. So you just have to roll for strength versus toughness and you're all good to go. And they've got the pretty good armor save of a 3 up in the front, 5 up on the side. Generally, nothing's going to get on your side anyway because you're bringing them around alongside, say, for example, your clan rats or your storm vermin. So yeah, they're going to be quite defensive. And the fact is that once they charge in, they're going to do a beautiful amount of damage, even as just a baseline thing. I like them because they're good at taking out armor. They can, of course, have a misfire, which is so common here. You can see that they can just explode and do damage to anything around by a template, or they'll do damage to pretty much anything touching them in a base, which is usually just your own stuff, or just do nothing at all. I have a lot of Doomflares. I actually have quite a lot of them painted up because I like Doomflares when I'm bringing out my themeless, or just in general when I'm playing a fluffy game. They work quite well for competitive too, so it very much depends, and they're pretty cheap. It's just how it works. I don't know. Doomflayers, I have nothing bad to say. I like them. I really, really like them. Poisonwing Mortars. Okay, so this is more artillery based, but it's another weapons team. So range 6 to 24 inches, pretty decent. Strength does vary, damage 1 and no armor saves allowed. How this works is you want these from far, just peppering everything that could be done. The issue with this is it fires like a stone thrower, and that means that it's incredibly random, so whatever you're firing at could literally not be what you're firing at. It could literally just fly off with the scatter, and yeah, I do have some PTSD from this too. The thing is, if you're dealing with a big horde enemy faction, then this is pretty good for you because you're guaranteed to try and hit something eventually if it doesn't blow up, and if it does hit, you just put the template on it. It's a small round template, which still gets quite a decent amount of models. I think if you maximize it, can get around 15 to 17 models. This is obviously on a 20 mil base, not like 25s. And then you hit them with no armor saves allowed, which is on a roll of a 4 up and a roll of a 5 up. It depends on the section of the base too. And they themselves are quite resistant, only taking damage to it on a roll of a 5 up. The thing is that you're guaranteed to do a bit of damage with these things, and they're quite good depending on where they go. Now, it could be the issue of them blowing up and then being removed, which can happen. Then it could be the issue of them wildly off target, which can go, well, anywhere. It's yeah, it's a bit of an issue when it lands on your own stuff. And then obviously just clogged when nothing happens and they take a turn and that's it. It's not that bad, it's not as punishing. I would say that the damage output is really, really fun. And yeah, you could really do a lot of really cool stuff with it. I've seen it hit a unit of Hageneth Executioners and doing a lot of damage. It's something that if you're going to take the risk, you might as well. That depends on what your playstyle is. A lot of things with the Skaven is that you're going to focus around loads of different types of possible playstyles, and it might not fit with your thing. I say that this is one of the more versatile books because the faction is done that you can play as any of the major clans or the minor clans. It's got a lot of roleplay ability, even with competitive play. Lastly, the Warp Grinder. So this can be attached to, say, Night Runners and all that, and I'll be very, very, very honest with you. Out of all the weapons themes, I just don't see a point with these. They're essentially just there to allow your stuff to be ambushers, and yeah, you don't want to really be an ambusher with a Skaven. Yeah, you can with like a clan Eshin list and all that, but in most cases, you want your horde together so you can overwhelm your army. I just don't see a point. I honestly don't see a point. They've got cool rules and they do a decent amount of damage, but out of everything, I think this is the unit I just dislike the most. So yeah, it's just one of those things. There's always one unit when you look at an army book that you're just not going to like. This might just be it. It's permanently attached to, and yeah, I've not seen a valid use for these. I'll be very, very honest with you. And now one of the most expensive units in the, well, I think it is the most expensive unit in the army book. It is the Hell Pit Abomination. 235 points per model, decent stats all around. A lot of special rules, as you can see. Now, the Hell Pits themselves are very, very special, mainly because it's a big beastie. Big beasties kind of suck when it comes to 8th edition. Again, this is an issue that the edition had all around, but you've got like really cool rules, I must admit. Like, they're really, really fun. So you've got Shambling Horror, which decides how much movement you get. This is basically 3d6 per turn. So this is very much laws of averages. So you'll move around basic, but you can get very lucky and then just move a lot or just nothing at all. It very much depends on the roll of the dice. However, you get any triplets, and this can be a bit of an issue. Then you've got the Berserk Abomination chart, which either means that they'll stop, which it could be a bit of a hindrance, especially since you want this big beastie as close combat as possible. Then there's Blind Fury, which can make it just go around anywhere, which, yeah, can be a bit of a hassle, as you can land on your units, and that causes some impact hits. Or you could get Fluid Injection, which makes them stronger for the remainder of the game, which, yeah, it's just nice. Because it's an extra strength, you can't do this multiple times, and it can turn against you. But the thing is that the monster itself is so good that it generally has to have a lot of negatives. I know, it's not a great thing to say, especially when you start looking at the close combat attacks, which is quite random too. It kind of works like a giant, but it does a lot of damage, as you can see. Feed itself isn't great, but Flailing Fist allows you to do a lot of damage, same as kind of like Avalanche of Flash. So you've got a lot of cool things here, and I would say that they're just really nice to use. I like Hell Pits. It's very hard to justify purely because of their cost, but I like using them. When they die, you've also got some really interesting stuff too, because it's got too horrible to die. On a 1 to 3, it's dead, right? Done. On a 4 to 5, you summon Rat Swarms, which is really, really cool. Or on a 6, it just comes back. And I love how a unit can do this, because it's kind of cool when it does it. Like, it's really satisfying to see a Hell Pit get killed, because you've done a lot of damage and a lot of damage being thrown at you, and then it just comes back, because, I mean, that's awesome. You can upgrade them to have Warpstone Spikes, which gives them magical resistance, and in general just gives you magical attacks too, because obviously it's a Warpstone weapon. I'd honestly say, and this is complete honesty, if they weren't 235, say they were just basic 200, I would bring them more, because I think it would be a more justifiable. The thing is, they're just very expensive as it stands, and it's very hard. 8th edition was just horrible for monsters in general, and it's just a shame, because they're just so cool. Like, it's one of the best looking miniatures, and they're just so impressive, but yeah, too expensive, way too expensive. I wouldn't even say 200, maybe 175. I don't know. With these things, it's very hard, because cannons can easily just fire and you're done. They've got regeneration, which is cool, sub and terror and all that. But the issue is that one flaming weapon and they're done, or a good cannon shot sometimes too. The expensive stuff will get targeted. It's just generally how it goes. Doom Wheels, the ultimate meme. So 150 points per model, 3d6 per movement, which is not too bad, but then again, you can get stuck with, say, for example, just 3 inches, or you could move quite heavily with 18. It very much is luck-based. Everything here is a lot of RNG, and yeah, they're good. Look, 4-up armor save, immune to psychology, impact hits, large target, terror. They're very, very good. When they do damage, because essentially you just want them in close combat and they'll just keep damaging. The fact is that they can also flee for 3d6, good, that gets them out of the way. And if they pursue, it's 3d6, which is fantastic, because you're going to catch a lot of stuff if they flee. High toughness of toughness 6 means it won't get hurt as much, but there's a bit of an issue there with a few things. First up, we've got loss of control. So loss of control is a test you have to make, and this is where things get a bit annoying. Essentially, when you take damage, you can go out of control, and you have to take a test for each time that you've suffered a wound, by the way, and that could either go into different distances, because this is now determined by your scatter dice. You can either hit an enemy and get locked in combat, you can hit one of your own units, do damage to yourself, or leave the table, but you'll come back next turn. It's not like you're actually getting destroyed, which is a good thing. So yeah, it can be a bit finicky. It's a weird thing, because they are so good at doing damage. It's because of grinding down the foe and the impact hits and so on. They can easily keep doing damage and damage and damage. but then you've got Zap, which can then shoot at your own guys because you have to take a restraint test. This is obviously if your own units are the closest thing, because this is going to shoot whatever's closest. It's very Skaven-y. It's definitely very Skaven-y. It can, you know, take a lot of damage, blow up, and it happens a lot with misfires. There's so many misfires, and you might have noticed a bit of fatigue mentioning misfires because the Skaven have so many. This is why competitively you have to be very careful of what you bring, unless you're going in just to like have fun, which for fluffy games is fine, but for tournament play, I don't think you want to have your stuff blowing up because, yeah, it's not ideal. Personally, through fluffy games, I try to bring in Doom Wheels often because they're fun and they're memey and, yeah, you know, you just want to enjoy a nice friendly game. Competitive play, no. I try not to because it's just not going to do it. 150 points is also quite expensive where you can bring more clan rats. Keep in mind that clan rats are usually the best thing to go. And yeah, I know that sounds boring, but it's Skaven Horde. Warp Lightning Cannons, okay, so really doesn't need a lot of discussing because they act like cannons. It's the same thing, they've just got their own specialized type of misfire, but it's exactly the same thing. They cost 90 points per model, which isn't too bad in all honesty. So you always kind of want to bring one, especially if you're going to be dealing with, you know, big monsters and stuff like that. It can get a bit technical when it goes with the whole, well, explosion and yeah, but I've got to say, in general, for 90 points a model, you can't really go wrong, especially because in most cases, you're going to want to bring a war machine like this because you're going to be dealing against something which has a big war machine. So, yeah, that's all I can really say. Then, lastly, we've got the Plague Crew or Catapult, which fires like a stone thrower, and it pretty much works the same way. It's fairly cheap, too, at 100 points per model. I know that might be expensive, but given the fact that it's so powerful, yes, strength to attacks, it's not great, but the fact that, well, you know, no armor saves are allowed makes it a great anti-horde option for, you know, Empire Greatswords or Chaos Warriors, pretty much anything that will cause a lot of damage to you. So, yeah, it's not bad. It's honestly not bad. Plus, the thing is with the Clan Pestilence stuff is that you want to pair it with magic, and we'll get to magic very, very soon. In general, I'd say that this is quite good. It's probably the better stone thrower out there, but works exactly the same way as other stone throwers. So there's no point talking about the misfire chart and all that because it's just how it is. We're going to start moving on to Lords and Hero options now. The first one going to be the Warlock Engineer. It's only 15 points. Pretty cheap stat line all around, but then again, it's a cheap model. The idea is that this is your Build-A-Bear, so what you can do here is just kind of tailor it. If you want to make it a wizard, you can. It gets more expensive. If you want to make it a weapons expert, you can. It just gets more expensive. Or then you can start moving around and choosing items and tailor it. The main thing is that Warlock Engineers were there to pretty much bring in, say, for example, Doom Rockets. You wanted a cheap character that you could take up there just in case the Doom Rocket exploded on you. Because it's something that could happen, you know, Skaven and all that. But generally, Warlock Engineers were super popular. You'd always bring at least one. It depends on what your playstyle was, but I really enjoy Warlock Engineers. I think that they're quite cool, and you can play around with them quite a lot and just do a lot of different things. I can be positive about this hero because it's saved me a lot of times. The one when using a Doom Rocket is just very helpful. Very, very helpful. Chieftains are your basic melee character, 45 points per model, quite cheap, decent stat line, actually quite a good stat line in all honesty, and you can upgrade it to be tailored to pretty much anything, where you could give it a halberd, great weapon, additional hand weapon, shields, items, and you can also make it a banner bearer. This is your banner bearer, and yeah, that's the best way to explain it. This is the character which is going to bring you the Skaven banners, which were quite powerful, and allow you to just do a lot of different things. So, in general, you want to bring a chieftain pretty much because most armies in 8th needed a battle standard bearer there, and yeah, it's cheap. That's the main thing. It's super cheap. Banner bearers are a must, so yeah, that's pretty much all I can say about this, though you can use it to become a chieftain for like damage dealing, which is doable. I just haven't seen it as much, and I haven't used that as much either, because I'd rather it to be a banner bearer and that's it. Plague Priest. Now, these are my favorite heroes when it comes to the Skaven army book, because 100 points per model, and it comes up with a very good stat line, you know, weapon skill 5, toughness 5, initiative 5, 3 attacks, well, technically 4 because of frenzy. They're just generally quite good, and they start off as a level 1 wizard. You can upgrade that to a level 2, then you can give them some weapon choices like a plague sensor, a flail, additional hand weapons, and some mount options too, but we'll talk about the mount options later. It really much depends, and yeah, like, they're great. I honestly love taking a Clan Pestilence theme list. It's my favorite Skaven clan, so yeah. They're really good for being in the upfront. You can have them geared out to do damage. You can have them geared out to just be a spellcaster. It very much depends on what you want. I have a Blender Plague Priest, which is fantastic. And yeah, I honestly, very, very big fan of Plague Priests. Then you can decide to have them with a Plague Furnace, which is a big mount, and we're going to talk about that. But let's talk about the Plague Priest. If you're going for a Clan Pestilence list, which you can very much well, I'd say bring 1 or 2, have them both dedicated to different things. You can have them being spellcasters, or you can have one being a spellcaster with level 2 and the other one being a Blender Lord. They're just so versatile, it's stupid. Like, stupid in a good way. So you can use the Plague Furnace as a man option for the Plague Priest, which is 150 points per model. It's quite expensive, and it's got a lot of benefits. You can see here, like, it's 2 pages. It's something that you tend to see when a specialist mount comes into play. So, for example, Icon of the Horned Rat makes the Plague Priest and the Plague Monks, because Plague Monks need to push this. You'd basically need to attach it at all times. They become unbreakable, which is very, very good. However, they will take some damage because of Pestilent Blessing. This is something because obviously you're dealing with a very volatile weapon, so yeah, it's going to do some damage. You've got to be careful with wording on YouTube here, because I was going to reference to something else, but you know. Now, this is a mount that you want up close and personal, so you've got to push it into battle, as I said before, and it's mainly because of Bellowing Death and pretty much anything else. You can use the Sensor to do a lot of damage. There's the Fume, there's the Wrecker. You choose what type of weapon you're going to use. The Fume is fantastic. You're going to be risking a lot of damage to yourself, but keep in mind that you are quite resistant to it because of high toughness and all that. It's the main thing that you want to use if you're going with a Clan Pestilence theme list. It's going to be a big target though, and this is a big thing, like I said before. It's going to be a very big target. However, it's a really fun war machine, and I must say it's just really fun to use, especially if you're going to bring like a block of, say, 50 Plague Monks to just keep it into place, because that works. You know, you can. It's just, you have to justify it. It's not a competitive model. It's just fun. And a lot of things with the Skaven thing, it's not competitive, it's just fun. Assassin Rats. Okay, so there's not a lot to talk about here, mainly because they work the same way as other assassins. So they're killers, not leaders, so they can't lead armies. And generally, they're just good for blending. You can beef them up to be good for challenges. That's pretty much everything that you want to do with them. They've got a natural dodge because, yeah, they're supposed to be very quick, and that gives them a 4-up ward save, which is very, very, very good. But generally, yeah, you want this to be for challengers. You want this to take out characters. You want this to take out units too, you can. I mean, the weapon skill isn't great compared to other assassins at the very least, but you can beef them up with certain items and all that. So yeah, you're perfectly fine. I'd say that they're fun, and you can use them to a fun degree. It very much depends on how you do your armies. I've seen use in them. I have. It really depends. But in no way would I call these essential. That's the thing. I mostly want to prefer a Plague Priest and a Banner Bearer, but that's more how I play, and some other people can obviously have some different ideas, you know? Okay, so we're going to talk about Lords now. We're going to talk about the Vermin Lord first at 500 points. I don't know what to say. It's a good character. It's got great stats all around. You know, you can see it there with the stat line and the fact that it's a level 4 wizard. But it's 500 points. It's way too expensive. I don't use them. I honestly don't use them. I use them for fluff games if they're going to be larger point-based values, like 3,000 points and all that. But for most cases, you can't justify these. And they're a large target because they're on a big base. I can't justify them. I honestly can't justify them. Maybe if they were cheaper, maybe if they were more dealt like, say, for example, a Demon Prince style. I don't know. It's just, I really can't justify these things. I really can't. They got a little bit better during the end times, but this is with the baseline vanilla book. I'm not talking about end times. This video is focused on the vanilla book itself, and I just can't justify Vermin Lords whatsoever. Warlords are the basic melee lord. Pretty good stats all around, 90 points a model. You can tail them up and have a little bit of fun. You can, give it a great weapon, additional hand weapon, halberd, shield, loads of items. It very much depends. I don't use these because I prefer spellcasting based armies. But for a cheap Lord option, if you want to move more of a Horde, this does work. This honestly does work. It very much depends. Again, it's more focused towards the type of player, but I like having a level 4 wizard, which is a lot more expensive, but you get a lot more out of it. Whereas a Warlord, I don't know. Magic is such an important thing when it comes to Warhammer Fantasy Tabletop, especially 8th edition, that you want to bring as much magic as possible, and you can get out your wizards to be quite good, tanky, especially with the Plague Priest. So, I don't know, I don't see too much use of a Warlord, though if you want something to be a great duelist, I don't know, because you've got this and then you've got the Assassin Rat. I don't really tend to use Warlords. I have a few of them painted, because you never know, but I can't justify it too well. Now we have the Gracia, 240 points per model, very expensive, but this is your main spellcaster. Starts off as a level 4 wizard, and it can use spells from the Law of Ruin or the Law of Plague. You can also mix and match. It's quite fun. It's your main spellcaster, it's your main lord, I'd say. This is something that you really need in your army. I mean, I have like a few Gracias that I have like little pet names for, like Whiskers and all that, because they win me a lot of games. And yeah, it's just, they're great. They're absolutely fantastic. Now, this is a very squishy character that you definitely do not want up front, but it's something that you want on the back or close to the front, mainly just to cast spells. They're a core. I must say that this is a core choice. If you want spells, you want Gracias. They're the best spellcasters you can get. You can also get D3 Warpstone tokens, which actually act as extra Winds of Magic. This is from the beginning of the game. You roll and say if you get a 6, you get 3 Warpstone tokens. And you can use that anytime, only with the Gracia. And it can miscast and all that, but generally, they're just so great. They're just honestly so great. For an extra 200 points, taking up to a total of 440 points, you can get the Screaming Bell as a mount option. The Screaming Bell is complicated. You can see here, there's a lot of rules. And essentially, it's only there for fluff games. I can only justify this for fluff games because there's a lot of rules. It's very, very complicated. There's a lot of really cool stuff because obviously you can ring the bell and get all these effects. So you can see that in the bottom right-hand corner. You can essentially cast spells for free, and it's so cool. It needs to be moved by clan rats or storm vermin, and it makes them unbreakable too. It's very similar to that of Plague Furnace, but it's very hard to justify bringing it. It is one of the most impressive models. And for fluff games, sure, go. Bring as many as well, you can only bring one. But bring them, have fun. There's loads of really cool effects and everything. But for competitive, this is a massive target. It helps that it does have a ward save, but it's still a massive target. I don't think it's actually going to be any good to bring in competitive. I tried a few times and yeah, it's not too great, especially since it's possible to randomize the shots and basically take out the Gracia, which usually is going to be your general, so you don't want to do that anyway, and it is your best spellcaster. When it comes to your Gracia, it's better to have him scrunched up in a rank of, say, 50 clan rats and just keep him safe. It will provide him a lot more protection than this will, whereas this is purely just for the meme, which, yeah, for friendly games, meme it up. Okay, let's talk about Skaven mounts, which you had to kit bash because there were no official models. So you basically, for a Rat Ogre Bonebreaker, which was kind of pointless, you just had to stick a model on top of a Rat Ogre, then kind of just mix it up. Not a great mount option in all honesty, because Rat Ogres were just kind of, yeah. But maybe that's just me hating on Rad Ogres, because I really don't like them. Same thing with the Great Pox mount. There was a mount which you could use, the Nurglish mount, but it's not really great, because there were no cavalry options. So yeah, it's a weird thing. Why would they include like cavalry options when you couldn't really do a cavalry option army? Like Skaven on Skaven would be interesting, but hey, maybe they had that plan for 8th, you never know. And then War Litter. So the War Litter is essentially like the dwarfs have, you know? So this could give you a 1-up armor save, and it was actually decent because you could use this in a rank without too much of a problem. The Bonebreaker you could put with Rad Ogres, but that's why I don't like it because, you know, Rad Ogres. But the War Litter you could put in a group of, say, other Storm Vermin, and it would make your character have a 1-up armor save. Then you could gear out his other points to, you know, making him very damage dealing. So it very much depends. But I could never really see a point in justifying the mount options, I'll be very, very honest with you. That and the idea of having to make the mount options rather than buy it, which kit bashing is cool. I really enjoy kit bashing, but for a core thing in a book, this was an issue that GW had way back in the day, where they would release rules for stuff and then not give you a model to be able to use it, which was extremely frustrating. But in general, I just couldn't see the point of the mount options. I know some people swear by War Litters, but yeah, I couldn't really see a point. Okay, let's talk about named characters. I really don't see a point in named characters because they were very overcosted as they were, and generally you could get a cheaper option by making a generic assassin or warlord or gracier and then just giving them items to make them even better. Deathmaster Snickage was 270 points, but an assassin could literally be a lot better. Yes, they do have some special rules attached to them, but you could literally just make better characters. Now, you did have some interesting stuff with, like, say, for example, your Lord options, where Lord Scroll could make Plague Monk's Core. So if you were going for a theme, you're good. But again, very, very expensive. 470 points is a bit much. Vanquil and Bone Ripper, 450 points. It could Claw, 395. Fraught is 225, which is fairly cheap, and you could make Rad Ogres Core and Giant Rat's Core, but then again, you know what I feel about Rad Ogres. And then Queek is 215, which is actually really good, and he's a very good duelist. He does a lot more damage to dwarves. Generally, and this is an issue in general with Warhammer Fantasy, and I hope gets fixed in Warhammer the Old World, there's no point bringing named characters. They were just way too horrendously overcosted, and you wouldn't be able to experiment. Keep in mind that there's also a point limit. So if I bring Skrog, that's already 25% of my Lords and Heroes limit, so I can't really bring a Banner Bearer, I can't bring anything else. It's a level 3 wizard, which, yes, he does have some interesting things, but even then, it's, I don't know. I rather just go with a generic thing, bring Gracia, and it's just a lot better. I know some people like it for fluffy games, and I think for fluffy games it's completely fine, but when you're playing in a competitive circuit, you're never going to see them, unless it's a very cheap character. Like, for example, yeah, it does justify bringing Queek, because he's really good at killing dwarves, and he does have a lot of cool stuff for challengers, and he boosts up some Storm Vermin for extra points, well, extra 4 points. I don't know. It would be nice if they had the same effects, but were cheaper. Not cheaper like generic characters, but a little bit cheaper just to justify their inclusion. Skaven Magic. Okay, so this is going to be quite interesting. You have 2 unique laws of magic only available to you, the Skaven spells of Ruin and the spells of Plague, plus 1 spell which isn't attached to a specific law. Both the laws themselves are very versatile, and honestly, it's pretty good. Like, the spells of Ruin are more focused on you can teleport, you can do some damage with Scorch and Warp Lightning. Crack's Call 2 is very good against dwarves. Death Frenzy makes you do a lot more attacks, and Howling Warp Gale is great to ground any flyers and reduce map-wide attacks through range. So yeah, generally quite good. The spells of Plague are the ones I prefer the most because a lot of the stuff is anti-armor. Plague itself is a wonderful spell that can screw you over too. A lot of these spells can, like, turn back on you, let's be honest. But generally, like, there are no complaints. I have no complaints. You should be encouraged to mix and match. You should honestly, if you're going to play as Skaven, if you're still playing 8th edition or you're just starting with 8th edition, because I know a lot of people are playing 8th now just to get used to it because they're hyped up for Old World, a lot of people are bringing their armies back. They're just wonderful laws of magic. They're honestly wonderful laws of magic. It allows you to have fun, and it's not like you have to take the 8 battle laws. Well, you can't anyway. This is just to experiment, and these are specific laws to you, so only Skaven can use them. I will say, out of the 2, the spells of Plague are probably the most competitive because Wither, Blessed with Filth, Pestilent Breath, Plague, Cloud of Corruption, all of those are pretty good spells, and you can get a lot out of it. You've definitely got better spells in the spells of Plague than you do have in the spells of Ruin. But generally, you can play around, you can mix and match. Keep in mind that some characters can only use certain things. So the Warlock Engineer can only use Ruin, the Plague Priest can only use Plague, the Gracier can kind of mix and match, so that works out quite well. It very much depends, but I go with Clan Pestilent builds because tank. When it comes to the dreaded 13th spell, it's not for competitive play. This is like a Hail Mary if you have it, and it's more of a meme more than anything else because, yeah, 25 plus to cast, you're most likely going to miscast. So this is unless you're either very desperate or you want to meme around. It's very fun to see, and it's fun for fluffy games, but not for competitive. Like, you are really tempting fate, and you're tempting to lose because of this, because you could lose your spellcaster to the warp, and yeah. But in general, Skaven Magic, very, very, very good. We're not going to talk about the Tools of Supremacy because this is very dependent on the player playing and what they pick, because there's so much. There's actually 5 pages of different items. Some of them are themed, some of them are just generic. So I feel like talking about these items would just be a bit redundant, considering different players, different styles, even when you go to competitive play. But with that, some final thoughts regarding the Skavens. So yeah, it's not a cheap army. You're going to be putting a lot of money into this, even if it's just for baseline units. You're going to need so many that you're going to have to buy loads and loads of boxes. It's definitely not an army that people should play if, well, they want cheap entry, which for Warhammer doesn't really work because there's no such thing as a cheap entry, but this is by far one of the most expensive, especially for Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Rules-wise, well, the Skaven have to be the fluffiest in terms of just fluffy play, friendly play and all that, because there's a lot of fun and it's there for jokes, it's there for memes. The Skaven is a meme army more than anything. When it comes to competitive play, you need to meta list horrendously just to build up some good stuff, and yeah, you need to take a lot of risks. That's the thing. You need to plan ahead and think, well, this is going to work, this isn't going to work. I think I spend a lot more time list building Skaven than I do for any other faction, but this has always been one of my favorite armies to run on the tabletop and always will be. I really hope that they keep a similar flavor when it comes to Warhammer the Old World, but yeah, like, it's such a great army, and I think this is going to be one of the first battle reports when battle reports return to the channel. But what do you guys think about the Skaven? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. I'm rather curious to see how the Total War players have heard and gone, oh wow, clan rats are cool, clan rats are very important, because, yeah, in Total War they kind of suck. But yeah, this was a very long video, and I think all the others are going to be the same. Well, there's going to be one which is going to be like triple the length, but we'll get to that when we get to that.